recording this for the coalition. We're going to put it on our YouTube page for people who could not be with us on the call this morning. We did hear from several people. Today starts, well, actually yesterday, May 10th, was the kickoff of National Prevention Week, a national effort to raise awareness to the importance of substance misuse prevention. And there's a theme every day of the week. And I was talking with Mr. Delena, special agent from the DEA, and he asked if there was anything that he could do to support our coalition, because he's an amazing partner that we're very lucky to have. We had to forego our national Take Back event that was supposed to happen last month. And that is something for the Raymond Coalition for Youth that has always been a very successful event. We participate each spring and fall. That was disappointing not to be able to do that, but for obvious reasons. So John asked if we wanted to do something to work with him to raise awareness of the importance of prevention now, especially more than ever with COVID, because I'm sure all of you know that people seem to have stopped talking about substance misuse and addiction to a certain level. Everything we hear, see, and live is COVID right now. So it's a great opportunity to raise awareness and start conversations and get people talking. So we're very fortunate to have John Delena with us today. And with that, I'll let him take it away. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you for everybody for starting off Monday and allowing me to help kick off National Prevention Week with you guys. I think you all know, if you've spent any time with me, how passionate I am about the work that you all do. I feel like I've learned so much from all of you and really from everybody that's involved with prevention throughout New Hampshire. It's really been an interesting journey for me. So I thought, since we had the time and I told Celeste I could really talk about a lot of different things. I do want to talk about what we're seeing with the trends, with drug trafficking right now, and a lot of that is it's sort of heavy and bad news. And I know most of what you do is uplifting and supportive of our community and our children especially, but it's important that you hear a little bit about that so you have the background. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about just what's going on in my world with me a little bit, with my people that work for the DEA throughout New England, and the challenges that we're facing with COVID. With that, I'd be happy at any time to stop and answer questions, or we can ask some questions at the end. And I just thought we could sort of take this journey together, at least for a little while, or until I run out of steam. How's that sound, Celeste? Okay.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay. All right. So for me, what COVID has looked like personally, I'm in this position now where I lead DEA's operations throughout New England. So we have the 6 New England states. We have men and women that have offices throughout all the states, and they're all equally busy. And you see me here in New Hampshire all the time, but equally I spend my time and dedicate my attention to the other states as well. New Hampshire's my home, and it's where my heart is. So I do try to pay a little extra attention to what's going on here. But for the COVID response, it really happened in Boston for us. Our main office is down at the Federal Building, which is in Government Center, right across from Faneuil Hall. And that's where the Marriott Long Wharf is, where they had that initial outbreak, where there was a pharmaceutical company, of all things, hosting a conference. And right away they found out, I think there was 77 positive cases that came out of that hotel. And we have so many people that just, walk by there every day, that take the train into work and go to Faneuil Hall for lunch. So we had to very quickly move to get a lot of people to start teleworking. And to be honest with you, with DEA especially, we don't move that quickly when it comes to making decisions like that. But luckily, our leadership team here was quick to act. And I think we probably saved a lot of people from getting sick. We sent a lot of people home. And what we've done throughout all of New England is essentially moved, all of our administrative people to a teleworking, like what most of you are doing. But for the agents, they have one single mission, and that, you know, we're the only single mission agency in federal government law enforcement, and that's to disrupt and dismantle these drug trafficking organizations. So there is no, you know, stopping for them. You know, they're still working every single day, and they're doing it heroically, I will say, but they're doing it with so many challenges. Most of our partners that we work with, our local law enforcement partners especially, rightfully so, have been sort of pulled back into the city to focus on what they need to do to keep, you know, their city safe during this pandemic. And if you're in a big city like Boston, or you're working with, say, the Massachusetts State Police, they're now tasked with setting up these makeshift hospitals and keeping the people there safe. So they don't have the time to really support, you know, the stuff that we're doing. So we're having to think outside the box. And that's something that DEA agents do really well anyway. So we're figuring out ways to still sort of go on with our mission, which for us is so important. What we've said all along, and I've really been saying this now for 57 days, and I said it on the Jack Heath radio show a few weeks ago, is drug trafficking organizations will never stop. They're driven by one thing, and that's greed. You know, they've killed more people than war has. They're killing 77,000 Americans, you know, every year. So they're not going to slow down because of a pandemic. They're only going to ramp things up and speed things up. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the shifts that they've had to make. But the first thing I wanted to really jump on, you know, again, talking about what's changed for us is, even for me, it's changed. I've been dealing with, you know, what most of you have been dealing with, and that's having to do things from home, and having to do things from home and make my visits to my offices isn't always easy. Just last month and this month, Celeste, I know you knew, but I celebrated a birthday, and I did it from quarantine. And this past week, I participated in a virtual graduation. I received my master's degree from Champlain College, and I wore my cap and gown in my living room because we celebrated, you know, virtually. And I was just reflecting back on, you know, what a year 2020 is going to be remembered as. You know, it was my 50th birthday, by the way, which is supposed to be a big one. But between that and graduating and you know, trying to work on my thesis over the last couple of months, trying to finalize what I needed to do to get that done, all from my living room and my kitchen, hasn't been easy. But, you know, this is what we have to do. We have to persevere. And that's what you all have to do as we go into National Prevention Week, is find ways to connect with our community differently than ever before, because you can't just give up, and I know you won't. And more than ever, the kids are counting on it. So I've made those adjustments, and you know, I know that you will this week as well. And you know, one of the most significant things I think we have to figure out is, what are we going to do having drug take back canceled on us in April? You know, how do we get the message out there that you know, from the national perspective? And I know we have Rich Lucy joining us from headquarters, DEA headquarters. You know, we're trying to promote this Secure Your Meds campaign. We're trying to get people to realize that while they're home, now is the time that they have to make sure that whatever medication they have, if they don't have the opportunity to properly dispose of it, which most of them don't, especially, you know, without having a take back, we have to make sure that we're getting the message out there that it's important for them to secure that medication. And, you know, even before DEA started talking about that, it was something that was on my mind, because I had participated in a briefing with law enforcement, and something that really impacted me early on in this thing that I heard about was the increase in child abuse cases during something like this, and the lack of reporting that goes along with it. Because, you know, talking to detectives and investigators that normally are participating in that type of investigation, a lot of times the calls they get are from a neighbor or somebody that just sees something that just doesn't look right. And now they're not getting those calls. The amount of those calls, even the governor has mentioned this in some of his early press conferences, is those calls are down because people aren't seeing one another. They're not seeing a child that maybe just doesn't look right. And there's a lot going on inside the four walls of people's homes that we might not know about. And it really, to me, seems to transition seamlessly into that whole Secure Your Meds campaign that we're trying to get the word out there on. We don't know what's going on in people's homes. And you know, I think as I look across the screen here, you've all probably had some good days and some bad days sitting at home. I know I have. You know, there's some days where it just seems like everything's going well and smoothly, and other days where the walls get very close. You know, I have my youngest son here with me. He's doing virtual learning, you know, and he's doing a really, really exceptional job with it. And then, you know, there's other days where, you know, he's climbing the walls himself. I see him looking at me, and I think sometimes maybe he's sick of me, like I'm sick of him sometimes. So we laugh about that, and you know, we try to do the best that we can. But I think that's why I'm looking for some help from you guys to get that Secure Your Meds campaign and get the message out there. I think it's something that we have to do, and we also have to start thinking about. Hopefully, there will be a take back in October. I know DEA has said that if things sort of slow down, that maybe we can squeeze one in before October. You know, I looking at the landscape here in New England in terms of what's going on with COVID, I just don't see it happening between now and then. I don't see us probably being able to get something off the ground. Maybe locally, you know, if things slow down in New Hampshire to a point where we can do something with some of the local PDs, maybe we can do that. I mean, we know we have full-time take-back boxes in almost every police department throughout the state. But we also know that, you know, for whatever reason, we don't get the participation at those take-back boxes that we'd like to. And we've always been very successful with our big take-back days here. And most of that has to do with you, and has to do with the coalitions and the people that, you know, that participate. New Hampshire, you know, I hear this from a friend in DEA all the time, because he remembers something I said to him 4 years ago when we were talking about take back. I said, we do things differently in New Hampshire. And he loved that quote, and he always says that back to me. And it's true. You know, I think, you know, the philosophy that we have here is that, you know, we know what we need to do to get it done. You know, I've always said that you have a group of people that will always participate in drug take back. You have a group of people that will never participate in drug take back. And my goal has always been to reach all the people in the middle. And I think one of the ways we've been successful in doing that is by getting the messaging out there so much as it leads up to take back, especially those last few days. It's also been very helpful to have some good media partners. And I use WMUR as an example. You know, for us to be able to go on and do a live broadcast or a take back live, Facebook live rather, the day or two leading up to it really helps remind people to get out there that day. And then when you do events like you do in Raymond, where you turn it into something more than just, you know, a drop off your medication, and, you know, you try to get people to come out, whether it's through raffle prizes, free food, music, or any other type of event, it always seems to work. And it's worked well in Manchester as well, when the PD does a big event and they put the touch a truck stuff out there, and they get the SWAT team and the K9, and you make it where kids want to attend. And when we have that message starting from the ground up, when we have the children telling their parents, hey, I want to go to this event, I want to go out there and participate, I think that's why we've seen a lot of success with it. So we need to really think about, as a team here, if it's October when we do this, how are we going to have the most impact? We've lost some steam by missing out on April, and people's minds will be elsewhere. If we are able to turn it back on and do it in October, I think we all need to think of how can we make it bigger and better than ever before? How do we make sure that we get the participation that we need? And we also probably need to think about how do we engage those people with masks and gloves on, because likely that's what we will have to do. So these are some things that I'm just hoping that our collective team here can start thinking about as we start to get down that road, because I think October for us, if we are able to do it, will probably be the biggest take back that we've ever had. And you know, we've collected as much as 15,000 pounds in some of those 4-hour blocks. We also probably will need to think about, when I'm looking at it, at the event as a whole, you know, I think our record is somewhere around 105 collection sites on take back for New Hampshire. And I'd like to see if we can actually increase that and try to get into the North Country a little bit more. And we'll work with some of our partners up there to make sure that we're reaching those people that probably need a little extra help getting out. October is also usually a down take back for us because of the weather. So we're going to have to factor that in as well. And if history will tell us anything, as bad as 2020 has been for us, it will likely be a blizzard whenever we are going to do take back again. So we'll have to prepare for that as well. And Celeste, I think you're going to need to get some shovels and.
No, I'm going to advocate, as I always do, for the beginning of October, please. Well, for whoever sets that date.
We have Rich Lucy from DEA headquarters listening in. So Rich, please make a note of that. I know that, you know, early October, you know, listen, we had a snowstorm here this past week, right? I was talking to my folks up in Vermont and saw some video of one of the agents' houses up there, and it literally was a whiteout of snow on Saturday. So it was pretty incredible. So anyway, that's sort of take back, and you know, again, I sort of leave it open, and I just really hope that people will start thinking about it, because I think we have our work cut out for us when it comes to what it's going to look like, hopefully in October, hopefully early October. But either way, I think we're going to have to really put a plan together to see if we can have the biggest impact that we can possibly have. And I know that we'll have a good partner again in MUR. You know, I think by then everybody will be sick of talking about COVID, and you know, I think they'll be looking for something different to cover. So hopefully, you know, hopefully we can get some positive messaging out there and get people to participate. It's been hard. I mean, you know, people are very focused on what's going on with COVID, and I haven't wanted to take the attention away from that either. And I've had some calls from the media asking what's going on. You know, the truth of the matter is we haven't seen much of a difference here in the availability and the pricing of drugs. We have nationally, and I know at the national level, DEA headquarters has talked about how some of the supply chains have been disrupted, and that's a good thing. And that some of the pricing has fluctuated as a result of that. There's some areas where the pricing has spiked way up because it's not as easy for these criminal organizations to get the chemicals from China into Mexico. And the Mexican cartels have had some difficulties in their conversion labs making methamphetamine and making fentanyl and getting it across the border. However, that being said, we haven't seen much of that change or impact here in New England. As most of you know, and most of you have heard me say, our supply city is Lawrence, Massachusetts, and really the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, Lawrence, Haverhill, Methuen, but it's mostly Lawrence. And I'm here to tell you right now that we haven't seen any disruption whatsoever in what's going on down there right now. With the exception of the street level dealers are wearing masks, so they don't get infected with COVID, it's pretty much wide open. And usually, you know, it doesn't take a 27-year law enforcement veteran to tell you that when something happens like what's happening now, usually the result is we see diminished street level enforcement happening because the police just can't interact on the street level as they normally would. And as a result of that, these street traffickers become more emboldened, and they're getting their product out there. The addiction, as you all know, doesn't stop because of a pandemic. It just doesn't. I think people like to think that that stuff is compartmentalized somehow, and maybe the addiction gets put on hold. But whether, you know, this was 6 months ago, day one of the pandemic, or day 57, people battling that addiction still have the same level of addiction. In fact, most of you are much better versed on this subject than I would ever be. But with the increased level of anxiety and everything that goes along with it, I would say that we're seeing, you know, the usage would only spike and increase. So we're trying to stay focused on that and trying to disrupt as much of that supply chain as we can along the way. We've seen a lot of increased activity in Lawrence. You know, for the most part, you know, we are fed by Mexican cartels who supply drugs to Dominican-based drug trafficking organizations who operate. And if we were having this conversation in the Midwest, in Chicago, it would be street gangs that would control the territory. And if it was out west, it would be similar gangs and Mexican-related gangs that have. For here, just because of the geography of where we are in the Northeast, it's Dominican-based drug trafficking organizations. And they do control the territory in places like Lawrence, Massachusetts. And they do have that toxic relationship, that business relationship with the Mexican cartels. And that's how the drugs are supplied here. So, you know, you've heard me say this. I've been saying this for a long time. You know, we see a lot on the news about China. We don't get a lot of packages coming in from China just because of where we are. We don't need to do that. The organizations here really don't need to do that because they have so much that is available to them from these Mexican cartels. As you know, it's been predominantly fentanyl that we've been dealing with, and fentanyl has been killing our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, our friends throughout New Hampshire. It's gone from heroin to heroin laced with fentanyl to fentanyl laced with heroin to now just fentanyl. And if you look at any of the reports that the medical examiner puts out, you'll see that trend exactly as I described it to you. You know, we saw at one point when they first started experimenting with fentanyl here, and that was back when most people didn't know it was fentanyl. You know, we've heard that the users didn't know it was fentanyl, the dealers didn't know it was fentanyl, and for the most part, that was pretty accurate. And what happened really about 3 years ago was they realized they had a product in fentanyl that was stronger and cheaper. And on their own, especially here at the mid and street level, they just flip-flop their recipe. So using these blenders that they use to mix these drugs before they sell them, they were taking mostly heroin and putting in a little bit of fentanyl and blending it up. But the problem is, if you recall some of those slides that you've seen where they show you the deadly amount of fentanyl, looks like maybe 7 grains of salt. When you mix that in a large blender with other drugs, you really don't know where that deadly amount ends up. So when they're doing that, and usually if I'm doing a presentation to the public, what I tell people to do is if you today get a blender out and you take salt and sugar and you put it in your blender, you would agree that if you put your fancy blender on full blast for a couple of minutes, that it would really mix up well. What it doesn't do though is it doesn't blend together. So if you then take a teaspoon and you take a teaspoon and you scoop out a teaspoon's worth and lay it on your table, you don't really know how much salt and how much sugar you get in that teaspoon. And the same is true with fentanyl. When they're mixing fentanyl in with with heroin or now with whatever they're cutting it with, they can never really determine where that deadly amount of fentanyl goes. And they package it up and they put it out for sale. They'll never, unless scientifically they bring in, a lab, which they're never going to do, and they bring in scientists and they're able to liquefy it and bring it back to a solid where they can dissipate the deadly amount throughout evenly. That's never going to happen. And they're okay with it for the most part. The users know that, and they're still willing to experiment with it every single day. The problem is sometimes they're going to get a bag that has all fentanyl in it, and that's just going to kill everybody. Sometimes they're going to get a bag that has just all cut in it, and that's really just going to make people mad. But usually what happens is there's no rhyme or reason to it. So when we seize a finger, which is usually how they sell it in 10-gram increments, and for the math experts in here, I'll tell you that 1/10 of a gram is a dosage amount. 1/10 of a gram is a dosage amount. And usually the way they sell it is in 10-gram fingers. And if you can see the video, it's pretty much the size of your index finger. What they do is after they blend it, they have these stainless steel blocks that they actually have a machinist create, which have 10-gram holes in it. And they scoop in the powder, and they use a hydraulic jack to compress it. And it comes out as hard as a bullet, but it's about the size of your index finger. Celeste, do you know why they like to package it in fingers?
No, I'm going to say.
Because a finger is easy to hide if it's that shape inside very nasty parts of your body. So when they're driving up 93, that's usually where they like to hide it. And we've had as many as 60 fingers hidden on people. So it's very difficult for us to locate. Some people will swallow it. Some people will insert it somewhere, and it makes it very challenging for us to find. But when you have that finger, that 10-gram amount, if you hear that somebody was arrested in Nashua or arrested in Manchester or arrested in Raymond with 10 fingers, now you need to do the math and realize that 1/10 of a gram is a dosage amount. They get as many as 100 and sometimes up to 300 if they cut it again, dosage units out of one finger. So if you hear somebody's caught with 10 fingers or 100 fingers, you have to realize how many people that could affect just from that one dosage unit. And what happens is when we seize that finger, we now test it in multiple locations. And what we find is exactly what you'd expect is one corner might have 98% fentanyl. And that's just going to kill them every single time, or at least cause them to overdose, and hopefully there's somebody there that can bring them back with Narcan. But in the other corner, it might be 6, 2, 5, 27, 11. There's no rhyme or reason to how that fentanyl sort of is situated in that finger. And that's why we see so much overdose. That's really why we see so much overdose. And, a lot of talk has been about are the amounts of overdoses leveling off? Are they coming down? And, I think that we need to be very cautious in how we proceed in those discussions. I think that thankfully, fentanyl is still as dangerous as it's ever been. But thankfully, we have so much Narcan readily available now that we're able to revive people faster than ever before. But the problem with that is we don't get to capture those numbers. We really don't know. There was a time in New Hampshire where I could look it up and I could tell you how much Narcan we had administered. So we knew how many people had overdosed. But we don't have that now because it's a blanket prescription. And we're seeing uniformed police officers pulling over cars that there might be 2 or 3 used Narcan on the floorboard of a car, which you can imagine the impact that must have on that maybe that brand new officer or a 20-year veteran. I mean, it's very impactful to think that somebody has overdosed in this car and has been either they died or they've been brought back to life. And this cartridge of Narcan is now just thrown on the floor. It used to be significant for law enforcement if you'd see a syringe, a used syringe especially. That was very, especially when I was a young officer. I mean, that really, it signified a lot. But now it's all about it's all about, you know, somebody is actually overdosed and they're still making that trek back and forth. So with that, we've seen two other trends that I want to hit on real quickly. These are probably the two worst things that we're seeing happen in New England. Worse than probably the beginning of fentanyl here. The one is the fentanyl pills, and I've actually been talking about this for a while, so you may have heard me say this, but we're seeing it here more than ever before. If you are buying pills on the street, they are fake. They are made with nothing but fentanyl. As the head of the DEA in this region, I'm telling you that we're not seizing real pills on the street like we used to. So people used to get prescriptions and then sell them. People used to rob pharmacies and sell them. There was a lot of ways that they would divert legitimate pharmaceutical pills, hydrocodone, oxycodone, Percocet, and sell them. The Mexican cartels have decided that it makes sense for them to manufacture their own pills. So they get the best machinery that there is. They get the best scientists and chemists that they can, and they can make the pills look just like pharmaceutical grade pills with the actual branding of actual companies on there. So if you get a prescription for an oxycodone, they can make it look exactly like that prescription. The same scoring, the same colors, but instead of what's supposed to be in there, they'll use nothing but fentanyl. So we have one DEA office along the border in Arizona that 3 years ago had seized 0 of those pills. Last year, they seized 1.7 million of those pills coming across the border into the United States. They seized 1.7 million. We don't know how many got through. And I'm telling you that here in New England, if we're doing investigations and we're buying pills or seizing pills off the street, 98% of the time, they are those pills made with nothing but fentanyl. So if you think it's difficult to mix fentanyl in a blender, imagine mixing it in a pharmaceutical grade pill maker that's making 100,000 pills a day. They have no idea where the fentanyl ends up in those pills, nor do they care. Here's another point with that. If those cartels and these organizations are manufacturing those pills to look like an Adderall or a Xanax, who are they targeting? Who do they hope will buy those pills? Our children. They're specifically targeting our children when they're making those pills look like Adderall and Xanax. And you see those pills being sold, especially in areas that are heavily populated with, say, college kids, high school kids, because they know that's who the users are. And that's exactly what they're doing. These cartels are marketing geniuses. They have better research and development than Fortune 500 companies. They don't just randomly pick drugs and sell them. They specifically seek things out. They looked at the fact that we were clamping down on the overprescribing practices, and they know that that addiction wasn't going away. So they said, we will create the product for them. If they can't get it legitimately, we're going to make it for them. That's exactly what they've done. They've put those pills out there for sale. They also know that in places like New Hampshire, we still have an entire community of people that thankfully are not ready to put a needle in their arm. But for whatever reason, they're willing to buy pills off the street. So they're making those pills and they're putting them out there for sale. We need to get that message out there, especially to our children. These pills are in New England right now. We're seizing them by the thousands every single day here in New England. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont. Cases that the men and women of DEA in this region are working, we're directly seizing those pills. And I say that because I need more people talking about it and getting that message out there. The last trend I'm going to talk about is methamphetamine. We've always had an issue with methamphetamine here, but it's always been the homegrown one-pot version where usually somebody will blow up a house or a trailer by accident, and we'll find it, and we'll be able to go out there and seize a small amount. The Mexican cartels have decided that they want to create a methamphetamine issue, and they're starting to flood our market with it. It's much more potent than the methamphetamine that's created here locally, and they can get lots of it here, and they can do it cheap. And the way they're marketing it to people on the streets are, if you're using opioids and you're using fentanyl, this will help you get up off your butt and move around the rest of the day. If you need to go to work, or if you need to take care of your kids, or if you just need to go out and steal something to go out and buy more drugs, this will help you do that. So we're seeing that up and down, that take the methamphetamine to get up, and then take, you know, the drugs that you want to take to get you down again, the fentanyl. And this isn't just me sitting here at my dining room table, you know, sort of coming up with my own theories. This is backed up two ways. It's backed up by the crime lab, say here in New Hampshire, which for the first time in its history, the New Hampshire State Police Crime Lab is taking in more methamphetamine than fentanyl. It's never happened before. And by the way, the fentanyl numbers haven't gone down. It's just this sudden increase in methamphetamine here in New Hampshire. And the other way that we're seeing it, and this is more alarming, is we're seeing it through the medical examiner. You know, I spoke to Kim Fallon at the medical examiner's office maybe a year ago about this, and we had these conversations, and this isn't one of those things that you want to be able to say, I told you so. But last June, I went to Mexico on a trip, and we brought some police leaders, and we talked about methamphetamine back then, and we talked about probably seeing it here in New Hampshire, and now we're seeing it in the toxicology of the overdoses. We're seeing a deadly combination that they've never seen before, of people that have both methamphetamine and fentanyl in their system. And it's just such a you know, a toxic mix. And, you know, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, you know, and people ask me all the time, why would you do both if they do two different things? They really do. In fact, I had a conversation with Sam Quinones, who's a famous author. He wrote the book Dreamland. And if you've read Dreamland, and, you know, he studied this probably longer than any of us have. And he said something to me that stuck with me. He said, those two cultures don't even mix. The opioid culture and the methamphetamine culture, they really don't jive together. They're two completely different things. How are you telling me that they're coming together now? And I was able to sort of have this discussion with him and show him the results that we're seeing. And it's really just, this entire thing has been driven by the Mexican cartels. Nobody here said, we want this. They put it here. And they said, you will take this. And they put it out on the streets, and they started putting it out there in samples and putting it out there for free. And they started getting their messaging out there, just like you know, any consumer-based research would do. And they put it out there. And sadly, we had enough people that are buying into it that we're now seeing it more and more here. So a lot of the investigations that we're working on now are a combination of fentanyl and methamphetamine. And with that, I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to ask Celeste if we have any questions or anything specific.
So we can either do it in the chat, or we can one at a time ask a question if we have a small enough amount of people, I think, to do that. I did have a question, John. I know at one time we were told to be on the lookout for cocaine because that was increasing cocaine use. Is that something that's still an issue?
It is. Yeah, it is. You know, a lot of that starts with, you know, there was some decreased enforcement in Colombia. You know, some things that we were doing in the past that hadn't been done, and there's been more cocaine coming in really than ever before, large amounts. You know, I try to stay, you know, as focused as I can here. And even with methamphetamine, I try to remind people that it's fentanyl that's killing our neighbors. That hasn't changed here in New Hampshire. Have we seen more cocaine in New Hampshire? Yes, absolutely. We've seen more cocaine than we have in the 4 or 5 years that I've been here. You know, we have a lot more people using drugs than ever before. You know, and sadly, most of the time, people use whatever's put in front of them, if that's what they have to do. You know, there are people now, And I have a friend who runs federal probation in New Hampshire. And I had this discussion about methamphetamine with him, and he told me that a lot of people that are taking the medically assisted treatment drugs, and you know, here's my disclaimer. This is another bad news thing that, you know, people don't really want to hear this. There are people that are taking the medically assisted treatment drugs that people are fighting so hard to make available to people to help them with the opioid addiction. And there's just a lot of people that are trying to get off fentanyl, but still want to get high. That's bad. That's bad news. And that's tough to hear, but that's sadly, in some cases, that's the truth. Let's hope that's not in all the cases. I know there are people that are trying to get clean. Those are the people that we're working so hard for, that they're trying to catch a break. But there are other people that just want to get off fentanyl and still want to get high. So now they're running to methamphetamine and cocaine. And you want to shake your head and say, you weren't even ever a methamphetamine user. You know, why would you now turn to that drug? And, you know, those are just people that they're just not ready yet. You know, you've heard this before, and I've had this, you know, I've had this discussion with Zach at Teen Challenge, Celeste, and people that work with people battling addiction. And, you know, sometimes they're just not ready. You know, maybe it's a blessing that they are getting off fentanyl, and maybe we can keep them alive long enough to hopefully get them to a point where they're ready and they're willing to be clean. But, you know, that's where these Mexican cartels are so smart, is they know that we're in this country, especially, we have such a push to try to help people get clean. And now they're putting this myriad of drugs out there, giving them so many other options. So, you know, that's a long answer to your question. The fact of the matter is yes, you know, cocaine is readily available.
And obviously the big one that we run into a lot of problems with, which is readily available marijuana for kids, that they have access to that. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've seen any type of decrease in that. And having been around, you know, the youth groups and the children that I speak to, you know, that one of my biggest challenges has been, I try to be out there as much as I can, and I try to get out and talk to kids. And you know, the fact of the matter is if I go to a high school, or if I go to a middle school, or even most of the community groups, and I want to talk about fentanyl and opioids, you know, the biggest problem that the kids are dealing with is vaping and marijuana. You know, and I need to be able to talk about that as well. And you know how, Celeste, you know, I've been very outspoken about both of those things. And you know, that's why having, you know, people like Zach from Teen Challenge that are willing to come and talk to kids, you know, all those stories are the same. They were all abusing marijuana when they were in middle school. And then, you know, somehow they, you know, we know it doesn't happen to everybody, but they do climb that ladder. And most of it is the availability of prescription drugs has made that climb up that ladder, you know, very easy for some people. And that transition, you know, to everybody that swore to everything that was holy to them, that they would never, ever, ever do it, never touch heroin, never put a needle in their arm. When they become addicted to those prescription opioids, and that day that they're not available anymore. And it happens for two reasons. One is because law enforcement enforces our way out of that problem. But I'm, you know, I'm honest enough to tell you that that's not usually what happens. Usually what happens is they can't afford those pills anymore. Those pills are expensive. They're much more expensive than buying a bag of dope. And that's usually when they make that transition, which, by the way, that's why the Mexican cartels have gotten into the pill making business, because they can make a lot more money selling pills. They can charge a lot more than they can from a simple bag of dope. And they know that. And again, they're driven by one thing, and that's greed.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We have a question from Kathy. Are there any initiatives for harm reduction with the DEA?
You know, that's not particularly something that we're directly involved with, just because that's not, you know, that's not who the DEA, what our agency is. But we're out there and we're more available than ever before. I mean, you know, you saw here just things like DEA 360. And by the way, we brought 360 down to New Bedford, Massachusetts We've had a lot of success with it this year, although it's really been put on hold because of COVID. And they were in the middle of it. And we're going to Portland, Maine next, which is going to be another significant, significant trend for us. And we're also trying to think of what we can do here back in New Hampshire. It's been 3 years since we had the youth summit. And I think it's time to do something big and significant here as well.
Well, I know we would like to help you with that, if that's possible, if you're seriously considering that.
I am. I will tell you that right before COVID, I had a meeting with the people at WMUR, and we were actually talking about doing another similar event that they had a lot of interest in helping with, and they've been such a great partner to me throughout this whole thing. So we'll have to see. Now you're talking about bringing 10,000 kids into an arena. I don't know when we're going to be able to do that again, True.
Very true, unfortunately. I know when the Take Back was canceled, our regional public health network, some of us are on the call right now, we went and put together, I shouldn't say myself, one of our people did an amazing job with some of the graphics, and all of us contributed to it. But we did a lot of awareness around the DEA is on hold right now, but please lock up your medicines, don't throw them in the toilet, that whole thing. So I think, and then your campaign came out, I think the Thursday prior, and we did a really big push with all of that information, and we continue to push that out. Have you done any information, any campaigns around the pill situation, the fake pills? Or is that what you're asking us to get more involved in doing that?
I think, I don't think we've done a specific campaign around it. I know that if you look across the landscape, we're talking about it more and more at the regional level. There's been a lot of big stories done, on the news, especially down around the border. Arizona, our office down there, like I said, they've significant, hundreds of thousands of pills at a time being seized. So there's been a lot of stories about that. I've talked to some people. There have been some national correspondents that have been looking at doing a story showing those drugs going from Mexico, being created at a lab in Mexico, coming into across the border, and then ending up in a place like New Hampshire, on the streets of New Hampshire. So it's important messaging. I actually have some pictures I can share with you, Celeste, that maybe you can even start to help us put some word out there. And I know, again, Rich is on the line, and I'll ask Rich to maybe follow up with me, and maybe we can find some ways to help connect, to get some of that messaging out there.
I know you had spoken with our youth group at one point, and a couple of them, I forget where we were, Christine, with them. But when you had mentioned that and the kids heard it, their eyes were like, they popped, because they knew friends of theirs, they knew other kids in the school were misusing prescription drugs, and the fact that they could have been getting them off the street, because no one thinks of it like that. They're the safe pills from the doctor. So,
Celeste, that's why I try to say it that way when I do. And I've seen that reaction every time I've mentioned it. I'm not trying to stand up there and do a scared straight, but I really try, especially if I'm talking to the kids, I try to make sure I get their attention when I'm about to bring that up. And I try to make sure they know that I'm speaking directly, from somebody who's here in New England, telling them that we are right now buying those pills in New Hampshire undercover, sending them to our lab, and they're made with fentanyl. And I'm telling you that, more often than not, that's what they are if you're buying pills on the streets right now in New Hampshire, because they're just not, the legitimate pills just aren't available like they were 10 years ago. And people still want the pills. So now the Mexican cartels are manufacturing them. And like I said, they can make them look like anything. They look like, in fact, we know usually they're fake, because that's just what, what's been going on. But we can't look at them and tell the difference until we send them to the lab. And then we get a lab report back, and the lab tells us that they're fake, meaning they're made with fentanyl. And that's a majority of the time now for us.
That's very scary.
I have a question. my math correct that a finger is 100 uses?
Yeah. So believe it or not, what the lab here in New Hampshire will tell you, it's between 100 and 330. It's 100 by doing the math that 1/10 of a gram is a dosage unit. But usually when they get a finger up to New Hampshire, somebody at a much lower level will step on it again and remix it with something else. And this is why this entire thing is so deadly and dangerous. Again, none of this mixing is happening in a laboratory setting. They're just taking something, some other product that they can add to it, so they can extrapolate more product, so they can make more money. Right? The more they have, the more they can sell. You know, and a lot of people, most don't really understand the potency of the fentanyl that we have here. So they just think it's almost this magic dust that they can add to anything and make more product. So they just try to remix it and repackage it and get it out there. But on an average in New Hampshire, a finger can yield between 100 and 330 dosage units.
Okay.
That's a lot. When one dosage unit is enough to kill you. Think about that. And, you know, we've even done that education, you know, throughout, you know, the entire legal community, because people start throwing around the term finger as if it's a dosage unit, because we hear it so much. So we really did this big push. We wanted people to understand just how much a finger is, because that really is a lot. If you get a finger into a neighborhood in Raymond, you know, it's enough to you know, feed an entire community of people. That's a lot. So we need to make people aware of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, what are you finding in the pills other than the fentanyl? So, you know, mixed in with the fentanyl, is there Adderall?
Yeah, no. So when especially when they're making them, you know, in Mexico now, and even before, the reason why the Mexican organizations got into it was because people locally around here started making them. We did a story with Boston Fox, I think it's Fox 25 in Boston. And I did a story with them that you can probably find. And I told them that people were going literally on eBay and buying pill presses. And they went and they looked it up. Now, it's illegal to do so. You can't do that. Like, pill presses are controlled with a registration, and, you know, but just like anything else, they find a way to sell these things. So we showed some that were these old, dilapidated, dirty, broken down machines that could spit out pills. And you could go on, you know, any website and figure out how to make the pills, what to use as a binder, because they have to use some sort of an ingredient that binds it together, and some sort of an ingredient to make the color look like the color of the pills. So they're not taking, at a laboratory in Mexico, a certain amount of legitimate Adderall and a certain amount of fentanyl. It's just all fentanyl. All the pills are the same. It's just fentanyl in the pills. They just all look different.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have another question from Karen, too. A few questions. Has the DEA developed any new messaging that focuses on the increased meth use?
Yeah, I think we've had especially recently, there's been a heavy push in getting that messaging out there, and also a heavy push on enforcement, just so you're aware. We're doing some national level initiatives with the Department of Justice to really attack those supply chains, the command and control elements of these organizations, not the person at the end of the supply chain on a street corner in Lawrence. We're trying to attack the organizations, you know, that are making themselves rich off of this. That's who we want to target.
Very good. So positive.
And I'll follow up with you as well, and I'll see if I can pull some of the national level language that we've been using, and I'll make sure I get some of that out to you.
Okay, perfect. And then her next question, have you had any connections through WMUR with Justin Spencer in Chaos and Kindness? Because of the influence that he has reaching large numbers of people.
Yeah, I've had that question before. We haven't, other than me paying to go to a couple of their shows, we haven't actually connected. But I think, you know, I think it's a good idea. And I think we've talked at MUR about it, and just through other people that know, that know Justin and talked about maybe connecting because they think, you know, maybe we could do something if we do another big event here to help connect to the children, especially in the community. Good thought, and I will follow up on it.
Yeah. And we've had some interactions with Justin ourselves with the coalition.
Yeah.
I think that it would be an education piece because he is such a great influencer, but I think as far as prevention is concerned, I think it would be a sitting down and going over things of what prevention actually is with him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hey, listen, you know, you had to do the same thing with me, right? I had a lot of people had to sit me down and make sure I was, you know, saying the right things. And it is a learning curve. It is a learning curve. So
I mean, all of us have been there. I mean, technically all of us have, you come out to save the world when you get involved and you think you're going to do it overnight, and you learn very quickly it doesn't happen overnight. Karen knows. I mean, she started working with me back in 2000. So I mean, it's a long process. And
you know, I still get asked if I speak to high school kids, especially, somebody will always raise their hand and say, why don't they just legalize heroin? Because that worked for marijuana. You know, I'll get that question all the time. And I've learned early on that I can't climb up in the stands and strangle those kids that ask those questions. So I need to have, you know, some legitimate answers, you know, some prevention based answers that I can, you know, somehow articulate. And, you know, it's not always that easy. You know, it really isn't.
we're very proud of you, John, because you're definitely a prevention person now. So.
Well, I am. And you know, I'm proud of it and I believe in it. And I say all the time, you know, prevention is a long-term solution to a problem that, you know, we wake up every morning wishing that we could all just solve. In fact, you're all paying me to solve it. You know, you're paying my salary, and my job is to solve it. And you know, part of solving it, I believe more than ever, is sowing those seeds of prevention. But that's a long-term, you know, it's a long-term solution, but it's one that we have to stay on course, and we can't waver from it, especially now during this time when, you know, just like, you know, my discussions with the men and women that work for me over these last few weeks revolve around, you know, my fear that, you know, everything that we had done to gain some ground in this fight, we're now sort of losing some ground because we're all in this weird space right now where we're not out there able to interact like we want to. And I'm afraid in the prevention arena, it's the same thing. You know, we're making such great gains, and you know, you work with, you know, the children and the youth of Raymond and across New Hampshire. We see these organizations, but now they're all sort of in this weird timeout, and we need to make sure that once this opens back up, we're able to fill that void and jump back in and sort of catch back up.
John, when you talk about attacking the Mexican cartel, what does that mean?
It means, boy, it means a lot. You know, we have a huge presence in Mexico. DEA agents, along with other federal agencies that are down there working with our Mexican partners at the highest level. I went into a lab in June in Sinaloa. We went down, we brought police officials from the United States, and I was able to bring a group from New England. And we joined some police executives from Baltimore and from Chicago. And we went down there to try to educate, you know, some of our state and local partners on what it's like to actually try to work in Mexico. What does that mean? Basically, to answer the same question you asked, we brought leaders of organizations. I brought the colonel from the state police, and I brought some other police executives from around New England, and so they could understand the challenges. And what happened while we were in Mexico City was DEA, working with our Mexican counterparts, hit a lab in Mexico, a methamphetamine lab. So they, with a ton of security, they flew us on a Mexican military aircraft into Sinaloa, which is where Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel are basically operating. And we landed and we were met by about 100 military officers, heavily armed, that put us in armored vehicles and drove us into a jungle into what they call a triple canopy jungle. And we had to actually get out. We were off road for 45 minutes, bouncing up and down in a 3,000-pound armored vehicle. I didn't throw up, but I came close. And then we got out and we walked through this jungle, and we came to a clearing in the middle of the jungle. And in the middle of the jungle was this giant laboratory. The first thing I saw was a generator that was about the size of a Chevy Tahoe, and it was powering this entire lab. And they had people that live out there, and they do nothing but create methamphetamine all day long. So this lab was capable of producing, and was producing, 7 tons of crystal methamphetamine every 3 days. That's one lab in the middle of the jungle. 7 tons of crystal methamphetamine every 3 days. It's amazing when you think about that, what they're able to do. That's what the men and women of the DEA are doing down there, is they're using investigations here, and we're trying to connect the dots all the way back into Mexico, because my goal is to attack those command and control elements and to bring them to justice in the United States. That's what we really try to do every day. We try to work these cases back, and we try to bring those organizations into the United States, as we have now done successfully with somebody like Chapo Guzman, and bring them to face justice in the United States. That's the goal of every investigation that we do. I can tell you that the cases that we're working here in New England are all touching upon the Dominican Republic and Mexico. We're actually making those connections. We've actually brought people and extradited them into New Hampshire from Mexico, from the Dominican Republic. And that's what our goal is every single day. And, you know, an agency like DEA, which is a worldwide agency, you know, we also have those connections into New York City. We have those connections every day where we see money right now that gets moved. When the drugs are moved into an area like New England, now they need to get their money back. And the way the organizations do that is they have a lot of central locations. They try to get the money back to New York City, to Chicago, and out to LA. And they stockpile money there until they can figure out ways to repatriate it back into their home country using several different mechanisms. They buy goods. They do that. They do bulk currency, where they try to put $2 million into something and ship it down into Mexico. Or they have people that sort of smurf it into bank accounts. There's organizations who all day long just do small increment deposits into hundreds of banks all around the country. They do that all day long. This is an ongoing business every single day. And our job is to try to infiltrate that, disrupt it, dismantle, and try to fill that void before another organization sets up.
Well, thanks for that answer. That was very interesting.
It's a lot, I know, it's a lot, but that's really, a lot of times people think, what are they doing here in New Hampshire? And they're thinking it's just New Hampshire based. 4 years ago, or even a little more now, really when I first started here in New Hampshire, what I started saying then was, we cannot win this battle if we're bound by jurisdiction. We can't think of it as a Manchester problem. We can't wait for everyone to go get drugs and bring them back in here and run around and try to catch them. We have to attack them where these organizations are most vulnerable, where the money and the drugs are meeting. And that's for us in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So we had to push our boundaries back, take it outside of Manchester, take it outside of Nashua, take it outside the Massachusetts, New Hampshire border, and take it to those source cities. And that's what we've done very successfully.
There's just so much money along the line that everybody's making.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars every day that are moving, almost seamlessly. And we've had a lot of success disrupting it. We've seized a lot of money. It's not uncommon for us to go into a house in a place like Lawrence, into a dilapidated apartment, and to find $1 million in cash and seize that.
Thanks for the work you do.
Yes.
Thank you for the support.
And all of your partners.
Yeah.
Another question, I don't know if you can answer this, is there anything we can incorporate into our, whoops, hold on. Scratch that. For treatment, and again, I don't know if you can answer this or not. have you noticed that they're focusing more effectively to treat cocaine and methamphetamine use opposed to the heroin use? Well, that's in,
You know, it's outside of my realm, and you know, I've met people that are in the treatment industry now, and you know, I think there's a lot of people that are really doing a lot of great work, and I hope that they're making those adjustments that you're talking about.
and then how can we, I think this is for all of the people on the call, as professional prevention people, help the DEA or work to?
Yeah, I think, you know, by doing stuff like this and by actually inviting me to come and allowing me to spend a Monday morning with you, that's a step in the right direction. And I think, you know, we've worked well together, and, you know, we continue to try to work together. And that's, you know, you need to continue to push my limits and to, you know, not just ask, but demand things of me. And it's my job to find a way to make it happen. And it's not always easy and it's not always comfortable. But, you know, it seems to be working. And in turn, when I know I need something, like, you know I need to get a message out about secure your meds, you know, I need you to do that, you know, as part of what we're doing as this team. It's worked. We need to continue to work together. Again, take back, you know, just doing the meeting that we now host in Bedford to kick off Take Back. You know, if I asked 99% of the people in DEA how Take Back sort of works, they couldn't tell you. And honestly, before I got here, I couldn't have told you. I just knew that it just sort of happened. And there were times that we were asked to stand outside in the parking lot and you know, reluctantly, you know, we did it. Now I understand sort of the you know, how to make it all happen and how to make it happen really well. And I think I'm seeing, you know, more people trying to sort of emulate that and bring that on. We've seen that happen in Maine. You know, they're making more events out of it. They're trying to bring the coalitions together at the early stages, because you all have the ideas to make it work where we don't. You know, for us, it's putting boxes out there and taping them shut. But we can do a lot more, you know. Yeah.
Again, I'll put that plug for a warmer weather day at the beginning of October.
I'll push for that. I promise. Yeah, you know, it's funny. I know that that's it's a national decision, and it affects everybody across the country. But you know, yeah, we've had some good days and we've had some bad days. That's for sure.
Our community responds very well to it, and they're very grateful that the opportunity is there. So we, as the Remand Coalition for Youth, are very happy and proud to participate in it, because it's definitely a service to our community. And we get all ages. We get a lot of seniors, and they tell their stories, but they have grandchildren and they have people coming into their homes. So it's just a great event, and we're grateful to the DEA for offering it to us to participate in it. So.
It really is. And I, you know, just from being out there and, you know, actually talking to the people when they show up, it's incredible. It's incredible to see, you know, what people have held on to. You know, a lot of times it's just people that just didn't know how to get rid of that stuff, and maybe they lost a loved one. And, you know, sometimes people show up with bags and bags of it. And other times it's people that are just saying, I just had this surgery and I want to get it out of my house now. And that's good too. And we just need to make it, you know, make it easy for them.
Very good. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. And I want to make sure we respect your time and get you off to your next call.
Thank you.
And I thank you for bringing your coalition mug with you and representing very well.
It's every
Glad
morning.
to outfit you well.
It's my favorite mug. I told you that.
Very good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us to speak with John. Do you have anything last thing to say, or you're good?
No, again, thank you so much for the time. And I really do appreciate it. I love to interact with everybody like this. And I'm always available. If you think of something after the fact, if there's some questions, please just let us know. And we'll make sure we get the answers out to you. And I'll follow up with some of that stuff, the methamphetamine messaging and some of the other things. And I'll see if I can get some of that out to you.
Awesome.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Celeste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
John.
See everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.